So, you want to hear another story, huh? One where the very fate of Pandora hangs in the balance? If not, too bad, I'm telling you anyway.
Borderlands 2 is the video game equivalent of that friend that everyone has. You know, the one who quotes random movies, television shows, and video games as a substitute for coming up with something funny on their own. Half the time you laugh, the other time you wonder what the hell they're talking about. Okay, so that might be a bit harsh. Borderlands 2 is still an enjoyable game in its own right, but it is at times one of the most obnoxious looter shooters ever made, and it's constantly trying to ram its humor down the player's throat. Amazingly, it's still got a pretty solid player base even all these years later, and it was kept on life support for a while by all the DLC they released as well. It's infamous for being written by Anthony Birch and for some of its questionable writing, but the real question is there a game worth playing underneath all the pandering and forced humor? Well, let's dive right in and find out, shall we? Following on from the events in the first game, you once again assume the role of a Vault Hunter, a morally ambiguous character on the planet Pandora in search of fame and fortune. After the demise of the Destroyer by the Vault Hunters in the original game, Pandora has been flooded with an important resource called Iridium, and a fellow called Handsome Jack working for the Hyperion Corporation attempts to bring law and order back to the planet by utilizing Iridium's raw power. In the game's opening, the new cast of Vault Hunters are left for dead after being attacked by Jack, and shortly after that rescued by a Claptrap unit, supposedly the last Claptrap unit still in working order. Then you begin a long journey to the city of Sanctuary, the epicenter for the fight against Hyperion. At this point, you'll meet up with the characters from the previous game, all of whom now have backstories, personalities, and their own motives and agendas.
You'll never take me alive, you robotic son bitch!
There's a real disarray between the original Vault Hunters, and they're all but completely lost until the player shows up, aided by the mysterious Angel, with the ultimate goal being to bring them all back together to take down Handsome Jack.
So.
I'd say that Handsome Jack is hands down the most interesting character in the entire game, and compared to the first game, which didn't really have a definitive antagonist, he takes on that much needed role with a lot of gusto.
How's your day been, buddy? We haven't really talked much since I left you for dead. Hey, you think you'll freeze to death out there? No, probably not. Bandits will get you first. My day? Been pretty good.
Like the first game, you choose a class to play as, so there's Axton the Commando, who functions like Roland originally did, throwing out a turret as his special ability. Maya the Siren functions a little bit like Lilith, able to hold a single enemy in stasis, allowing focused and increased damage. Zero is an assassin who's a bit more unique, able to cloak for periods of time and attack from the shadows with a powerful melee attack, though he's kinda hard to get the hang of. Salvador is a pint-sized, pissed-off little dude who can dual-wield guns when he enters his Gunzerker mode. Once you've spent a bunch of points into his skills, it can get to the point where you're almost perpetually in Gunzerker mode, and can fire away on enemies almost uninterrupted. Later down the track, Gearbox would also add in Maya the Mechromancer as DLC, who can spawn a mobile mech that runs around attacking enemies. The other DLC character was Krieg the Psycho, apparently a bandit turned good. He relies on melee attacks and having low health points to buff his abilities, and as such, he isn't all that much fun. Now, just off this selection alone, it should be obvious that Borderlands 2 has a whole lot of content. The base game alone will easily take upwards of 10 to 15 hours on a first time playthrough, and that's for a single character. Then you've got a couple different New Game Plus modes which are challenging as all hell, not to mention the half dozen or so different DLC packs which contain their own mini campaigns on top of everything else. Now, I've played Borderlands for upwards of 100 hours on the PC, and I still haven't even maxed out a single character. That's the amount of value you're getting out of the whole thing.
I don't die so easy!
Much like the first game too, there's a shitload of different guns you come across, some of which are preset and always drop from certain quests or certain enemies, but most of which are just randomly found in the environment during quests. And much like the first game, I'd say 90% of these guns are utterly useless. Borderlands 2 introduces the Golden Chest, which is a weapons chest that can spawn an infinite amount of times as long as you've got enough golden keys. Until endgame, the weapons you get from the Golden Chests are always going to be superior to what you'll find naturally by playing the game, and it's easy to accumulate a few hundred keys from the various shift codes Gearbox has been sending out over the years. Of course, if you want, you can still play the game normally and just use the guns you come across, but it leaves you at the mercy of the game's RNG system. The shooting has been given a bit more depth since the first game. Weapons still have elemental effects, but now the type of element you use against which enemy can have a huge effect, and if you don't have the right gun for the right enemy type, it can be a lot tougher than it should be. Using acid weapons against robots is an absolute must, and using fire weapons against human opponents more so. The type of gun you're using can make or break how well you do in the game, and it can kind of detract a little bit from the skill of the whole thing. I mean, you could be the most accurate person in the world, but if you're using the wrong gun against the wrong enemy, it won't mean diddly squat. In terms of a looter shooter though, there really isn't all that much to complain about with Borderlands 2. I mean, you're constantly leveling up, unlocking new skills and upgrading your character as you progress through the campaign. Side missions offer up fun little distractions, and if you ever get bored of a certain class, it's easy enough to start from scratch and pick another. I initially hated Borderlands 2 because I chose to play as Zero, then after a couple of hours I bit the bullet and started again as Axton, and I found it a lot more fun. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I mean, one man's trash is another man's treasure, and the way the game can be customized for each player's personal preference really has to be commended. One thing that's undeniably solid about Borderlands 2 is the presentation. Running on the Unreal 3 engine, it brings back the cel-shaded art style and looks even better than the first game. Every single area you visit looks different than the last, and the enemy variety is much greater with some awesomely bizarre new creations. Most of the voice acting is pretty good, with the dialogue for the bandits again just being downright hilarious at times. I particularly like the dialogue from the Goliaths as well.
I'm gonna gouge your
The music is just amazing, composed by Jesper Kyd, who has honestly never done a bad soundtrack in his life, and this has to be one of his best. The way it ramps up dynamically during combat is totally kick-ass, and it's some of the most unique music you're ever going to hear in a first-person shooter. But it's the storyline and some of the writing where things start to fall apart, and as I said before, Borderlands 2 is kind of obnoxious in the way it throws these constant pop culture references in your face. One series of side missions in the game almost constantly references the film Top Gun, even down to a volleyball match between shirtless, oiled up bad guys.
You can be my wingman anytime.
There's a Wikipedia page that lists most if not all of these references, and it's a goddamn mile long. The moments in the game where it's not referencing Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, Dark Souls or Minecraft is when the writing actually shines, but most of the time it feels like it's pandering to the lowest common denominator. Also, the character Tiny Tina can just go fuck herself.
Roland told me you were coming. I still owe him for all that butt crap with General Rancid. So you gotta hijack a train, huh? Child's play. Let me introduce you to my lady.
I guess the other problem with all this is how much it's going to timestamp the game. I mean, yeah, it's funny in 2012, but you really think 10 years from now when someone's playing it, they're going to understand an arrow to the knee reference? It's also massively out of place when you go from this kind of humour to a really dramatic cinematic where a main character, whoever, is killed off. It's a really weird jump. Also, when the villain in the game is the most likable character, you know you've messed up. The playable characters obviously don't talk that much, and the original Vault Hunters returning as main characters just aren't all that relatable. Mordecai and Brick are interesting, I guess, but Roland is boring and dry, and Lilith is just a massive bitch. She talks like a spoilt teenager and acts like an ice queen. Despite the lackluster writing though, there is still a solid game underneath everything, and if you're just playing this game to kill things and get big guns, well, you probably won't be disappointed. Borderlands 2 is a hell of a lot of fun in co-op mode as well, making enemies tougher and increasing the rarity of loot you get. There's a long campaign with a lot of ups and downs, but the first thing I wanted to do when I finished it all those years ago was just hop right back into it, into New Game Plus mode, and keep on going. And out of all the games I own, it's easily one of the games I've played the most over the years. Borderlands 2 is still a little bit expensive considering how old it is, but pick it up when it's on sale, and it will be on sale, and you'll get potentially hundreds of hours of gaming out of it. If you can look past the obnoxious dialogue and certain unbalanced sections of the game, well, there's a good time to be had.